You are standing in heat that has a texture to it, thick as wet wool, the kind of August afternoon where the asphalt goes soft under your boots and the air smells like scorched oil and dead grass. You are behind a gas station that stopped selling gas 11 years ago, its Sinclair sign faded to the ghost of a dinosaur, and you are watching a grown man, silver-bearded, sun-cracked patches on his vest that took him 3 decades to earn, go down on one knee in the gravel because a barefoot girl just grabbed his forearm like it was the only solid thing left in the world. She is close enough that he can see the crack in her lower lip has almost healed, the way a wound heals when nobody tends to it, just waits it out. She is close enough that he can smell the backpack she's clutching, mildew, and under that, something like fear that's gone stale from being carried too long. Her eyes never leave his face. They also never quite believe him. And she says it, low, cracked at the edges, like the words have been rehearsed in the dark so many times they've worn smooth. Don't tell my stepfather I'm here. Behind her, 40 yards off across the cracked lot, sunlight catches on something round and silver and moving. A pair of mirrored sunglasses, tilting as their owner steps out of a cruiser that has no business being here this fast, badge glinting, boots already crunching gravel like he owns the ground he's walking on. You don't know yet why a deputy showed up within the hour. You don't know yet what's in that torn green backpack, water stained at the corners, zipper half broken. You don't know her name. You don't know his. You don't know that this moment, her hand on his arm, the deputy's shadow stretching long and thin across the lot, the heat pressing down like a hand on the back of the neck, is going to end with 44 men deciding whether to break a rule that stood for 22 years. But you're going to find out. This is a story about a man who lost a daughter he never stopped looking for, and a girl who stopped believing anyone was looking. It's about a rule that was never supposed to bend, and a summer that broke it anyway. Stay until the end. You'll want to see where she is 3 years from now, and you'll want to see what he finally writes. Tell us where you're watching from. Somebody in your town has a face like his. Somebody has a voice like hers. It starts 6 weeks earlier, on a road that hadn't seen rain in a month. The road hadn't seen rain in a month, and it showed. The asphalt on Route 9 had gone the color of ash, cracked in long veins where the heat worked it like a fist working a jaw, and the fields on either side had folded in on themselves, brown and brittle, waiting for a rain that the radio said wasn't coming for another 2 weeks. He rode it the way he rode it every morning, alone, no formation, no brothers behind him, just the bike and the noise and the particular silence a man carries when he's been doing something so long it no longer requires thinking. 31 years of mornings like this one. His knees ached in a way they hadn't 10 years ago. His shoulders held the sun like a second shirt. He always took the loop past the Sinclair station, though there was no reason to anymore. It had been closed 4 years, the pumps chained, the windows filmed with dust that never got washed off, because there was no one left in this stretch of road who cared whether it did. He told himself it was habit, checking a route, the same way you'd check a lock on a door you no longer had a key to. He didn't examine it closer than that. Some habits are just old wounds wearing work clothes. The heat index that morning would climb past 104 before noon, though at that hour it was still only building, a slow pressure in the air like something leaning its weight down from above. He'd feel it first in his forearms, then his chest, then behind his eyes, the way heat like that always announced itself in stages, like it was giving a man time to prepare for what it was going to ask of him. He slowed without deciding to. That was the part he'd turn over in his mind later, in the weeks that followed, trying to locate the exact moment his morning became something else. There was no siren, no flash of color that didn't belong. Only a stillness at the edge of the lot, behind the propane cage, that read wrong to an eye trained by 31 years of scanning roads for what didn't fit. He'd learned, a long time ago, in a life he didn't talk about, that stillness comes in 2 kinds. There's the stillness of rest, and there's the stillness of something trying very hard not to be seen. He cut the engine and let the quiet settle around him, thick and immediate, the kind of silence that follows a machine when it stops. And in that silence he heard, or thought he heard, the smallest sound a person can make, and still be making a sound at all. He did not move toward the sound yet. That, too, was training. The kind that had kept him alive on roads and in rooms where moving too fast had cost other men everything. He had ridden for 31 years, first as a nobody prospect running errands nobody else wanted, then as a patched brother, then, for the last 11 of those years, as the man who rode at the front of the pack and decided when it slowed, when it stopped, when it turned. Road captain was not a title given for toughness. It was given for the eye, for knowing, before anyone else did, that a bridge was icing, or a shoulder had crumbled, or a car 3 lengths back was drifting the way cars drift when the driver has stopped paying attention to the difference between living and dying. He had that eye. He had built it the way a man builds calluses, through repetition and small pain, and he had never once used it on himself. If he had, he might have seen it coming 20 years ago, when his own hands were not steady, when the drinking had a hold on him that felt, at the time, indistinguishable from love. He had a daughter then, Dana. She had his mother's chin and a laugh that used to fill the trailer they lived in before the trailer became a thing the court mentioned in its findings. He did not examine that season of his life often, because examining it meant admitting there was a version of himself capable of the kind of neglect he now recognized on sight in other people. 19 years ago, a judge had looked at a man with his knuckles scarred from bar fights and his name in a police log more times than a father's name should appear, and had made a decision that was, Marcus understood now, entirely correct. He had not fought it the way he should have. He had let it happen the way a man lets weather happen. And when she turned 18, 6 years ago, and the last legal thread connecting them had simply dissolved, she had not called, and he had not called, and the not calling had become its own kind of relationship, one built entirely of silence, maintained with the same discipline he brought to everything else. He thought of her sometimes on long rides, in the hours when the road went flat and hypnotic, and the mind wandered without permission. He thought of her now, unbidden, standing beside his idling bike in heat that pressed down like a hand on the back of the neck, listening to a sound behind a propane cage that was almost nothing, a breath, maybe, or the scrape of a heel against gravel, someone trying to become smaller than they already were. He set the kickstand. The metal ticked as it cooled. He walked toward the cage the way he'd once walked toward wreckage on a highway shoulder, slow, hands visible, giving whatever was there time to see him coming before he saw it. The dumpster sat rusted and canted on a broken concrete pad, its lid propped open by a length of 2x4 someone had wedged there years ago and never removed. Flies moved in slow orbits above it, drunk on heat. He had expected the sound to belong to a cat, or a raccoon working the underside of the trash for scraps, something with fur and simple hunger. But the shape when he came around the corner of the cage was too still for an animal, and too deliberate. Animals froze from instinct. This was something else. This was practice. She was pressed into the gap between the dumpster and the cinder block wall, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them in a way that made her look smaller than her frame, folded down into the narrowest version of herself she could manage. Her feet were bare, and the soles of them were gray-black with road dirt, one heel scraped raw. A green backpack sat against her shins, canvas gone soft and pale at the seams, one strap torn so that it hung by a few threads. She did not flinch when he came into view. She did not gasp or scramble. She simply looked at him and kept looking, the way a person looks at weather they've already decided they can't outrun. He had seen that look before, not on his daughter, never on his daughter, and the absence of it there was its own quiet grief, but on men fresh back from places that had taught them not to jump at the sound of boots. Stillness that wasn't shyness, stillness that was calculation. She was measuring the distance between herself and the road, between herself and him, deciding in the space of a half-second whether he was a door or a wall. He stopped 8 feet away and let his hands hang open at his sides, palms rotated slightly forward, an old habit from de-escalating men twice his size in bar parking lots decades ago, the body remembering what the mind had almost forgotten how to name. "Hot day to be sitting in a dumpster corner," he said, and kept his voice flat, unhurried, the way he'd talk down a spooked horse. She said nothing. Her eyes went once, briefly, to the road behind him, checking, he understood, for a second vehicle, a second man, someone who might have sent him. "I'm not going to come closer unless you want me to," he said. The flies droned. Somewhere out on the highway, a truck downshifted, engine braking, the sound rolling flat across the heat-shimmered blacktop and dying. She shifted her weight an inch, just enough to bring the backpack closer against her body, both arms curling over it now, like it was the only thing in the county that still belonged to her. "You don't have to talk," he said, "but I've got water in the saddlebag, and I'm not leaving you back here to cook." Her mouth opened, then closed. When she finally spoke, her voice came out cracked and low, barely clearing the space between them. "Don't tell him I'm here." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He'd heard that particular register before, the way fear could flatten a voice into something almost administrative, a fact being filed rather than a plea being made. He nodded once, slow, so she'd see it, so there'd be no mistaking his answer for something he might take back later. "Nobody's telling anybody anything," he said. That was when he let himself look at her properly, the way he'd been trained a long time ago to read a wounded man across a room before deciding whether to approach, cataloging without staring, because staring was its own kind of violence. Her feet were bare on the gravel, soles gone gray-black with road dust, both heels cracked in fine white lines like old porcelain, the kind of cracking that came from walking a long way without shoes rather than a single reckless afternoon. The backpack was canvas, or had been, a green gone dull and colorless in patches, one strap torn nearly through and knotted crudely back together with what looked like a shoelace. She held it the way he'd seen new mothers hold infants in hospital hallways, not for comfort, but because letting go simply wasn't a thing the body would permit. There was a bruise on her forearm, yellow-green at the edges, gone soft and old-looking, the kind that had had time to travel through its colors and was now fading toward whatever came after. Below her mouth, a split in the lower lip had scabbed and was healing crooked, pulling the corner down slightly when she wasn't careful to hold her face still. He didn't say anything about any of it. He'd learned that much, at least, in 54 years of getting things wrong, that naming a wound out loud, too early, was its own kind of trespass. He crouched, slow, knees popping audibly in the heat, and set his water bottle down on the concrete between them, rather than hand it to her directly, sliding it the last few inches with 2 fingers. When his hand came within maybe 3 feet of her, she flinched, a full-body flinch, shoulders up around her ears, chin dropping, and he saw it land on the faded blue-black ink, crawling up his forearm from wrist to elbow, an old prison tattoo he'd carried so long he sometimes forgot other people still saw it as a warning. She flinched, but she didn't run. He held still and let several seconds pass, let the flies find the dumpster again, let the highway breathe its long, empty note behind them both. "Water's yours," he said. "I'll back up if that helps." He did, 2 steps, boots crunching gravel, and stood in the full weight of the sun, so she'd have shade to herself and space to decide. She watched him the whole time, unblinking, the way a person watches a door they're not sure will hold. She did not move for a long time. He counted it the way he counted things now, out of old habit. 1 Mississippi, 2, because counting kept his hands still and his voice out of it, and he understood without being told that a 15-year-old girl standing barefoot on scorched concrete did not need a grown man's voice filling the space where her thinking needed to happen. The heat index sat somewhere north of 104, the kind of heat that made the air over the highway ripple like something seen through water, and he could feel his shirt gone through at the collar, could feel sweat tracking down between his shoulder blades, and still he stood in the sun, rather than the shade, because the shade belonged to her now. Her eyes went to the bottle first, then to his hands, empty, hanging loose at his sides, then back to the bottle. He understood the order of it, that she was reading him the way he'd once been taught to read a room, in a place where reading wrong cost you something, and he made himself boring to look at, made his hands slow and visible, no sudden closing of fingers, no gesture that could be mistaken for a reach. She crossed the distance in 4 steps, quick, almost apologetic in their quickness, like she wanted the exposure over with as fast as possible. She crouched the way he had, knees together, and took the bottle by its cap rather than its body, and he understood that too. That her hand didn't want to know the shape of his hand's absence, didn't want to remember warmth where a stranger's fingers might have been a second before. She backed away before she opened it. 3 steps, maybe 4, until she had the dumpster's shadow at her back again, and only then did she crack the seal, the sound small and plastic and enormous in the emptiness between the pumps and the highway. She drank like someone who had trained herself not to drink too fast, small measured swallows, watching him over the tilted bottle the entire time, and he made himself look instead at the cracked asphalt, at the Sinclair sign hanging dead on its bolts, at anything that wasn't her throat working or her eyes counting him. "Thank you," she said, and it came out flat, rehearsed. The way a person thanks someone for something they've learned costs more than it's worth to refuse. He didn't answer right away. He was thinking about another kitchen, another summer, a small hand once reaching for a glass he'd poured too full, and how he'd flinched first, back then, long before anyone ever had reason to flinch from him. "You got a name?" he asked, gentler than he meant to sound. She looked at the water bottle instead of him. "Does it matter," she said, "if I'm not staying?" He let that sit. He'd learned, 31 years on a bike and longer than that on this earth, that a question answered with a question was its own kind of answer, and pushing past it only taught people to build the wall higher. So instead of asking again, he lowered himself down onto the curb a good 10 feet off, joints complaining the way they did now past 50, and he stretched his boots out into the sun without looking back at her. 104 today, he said, to no one in particular, to the highway, to the dead Sinclair sign. Radio said 106 by 3. Asphalt'll be soft enough to leave a print in it by then. He picked at a thread on his jeans. Bike doesn't like it either. Runs hotter than she should, past 98, 99 degrees. Something in the carburetor I never did fix right. 31 years I've had one bike or another under me, and I still don't trust the engineering past 100 degrees. He kept his eyes on the highway, on the shimmer coming up off it in long silver ribbons, and he let the talking be aimless, weather and machinery and nothing that asked anything of her. Somewhere behind him he heard the plastic bottle creak faintly as she loosened her grip on it, then tighten again. "Man in my club rides a panhead older than both of us put together," he said. "Refuses to touch it with anything but his own 2 hands. Says a bike's like anything else. You want it to last. You can't let somebody else love it for you." He let the silence come back in behind that, unhurried, the cicadas filling the gap the way they'd been filling it all morning. He didn't turn around. He counted the seconds the way he'd count them clearing a room, some old habit worn smooth by half a lifetime, and he'd gotten to what felt like a full minute when her voice came, smaller than before, aimed more at the dumpster than at him. "He locked the door last night," she said. "I slept out back, by the propane tanks." That was all. No name attached to the he. No hour, no explanation of whose door or whose house, just the fact of it laid down flat between them, like something she'd been carrying too long in her arms, and finally set on the ground to rest her hands. Then she went quiet again, the same stillness dropping back over her shoulders, the bottle lifted, another small measured swallow, her eyes returning to their steady patient count of him. Marcus didn't move. He kept his gaze on the highway shimmer, on the heat doing its slow violence to the horizon line, and he made himself breathe out slow before he let himself think anything at all about propane tanks, about a door with a lock on the wrong side of a 15-year-old, about a summer night with no one watching her sleep but the dark. The cruiser came up Route 9 faster than the heat should have allowed anything to move, dust rolling off the shoulder in a brown sheet that hung in the air long after the tires had gone quiet on the gravel apron. It parked crooked, nose toward the pumps, the way a man parks when he already knows he owns the ground he's stopping on. The door opened, boots first, polished despite the dust, then the rest of him, unfolding out of the seat, with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in his life worried about being wrong. He put on the sunglasses before he even shut the door, mirrored, the kind that gave a man back his own face instead of letting him see the one underneath. He didn't look at Marcus first. He looked at her. "There you are," he said, and said it the way you'd say it to a dog that had slipped its rope. Not unkind exactly, but proprietary. Already halfway to relief that would curdle fast into irritation once the relief had done its job. You had your mama worried sick. She didn't answer. She didn't move either, not toward him and not away. Just that same stillness, that same patient counting look she'd been giving Marcus for the better part of an hour, except now it had gone somewhere colder, somewhere Marcus recognized because he'd worn that exact expression himself once, waiting out an officer who'd already decided the story before he'd heard it. "You know this girl," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. He kept his voice flat, easy, the tone he used for younger riders who needed calming down more than answering. "Whole town knows her," the deputy said, and smiled, and the smile didn't touch the mirrored glasses at all. "She does this, runs off. Her stepdad's about worn through his boots looking for her the last couple times," he said. Stepdad. The way a man says a name he's used at a barbecue, comfortable, familiar, worn smooth from years of use. Not. Her mother's husband. Not. The man at the house. Stepdad, like it was a fact everyone already agreed on, and Marcus was the only one slow to arrive. Something in Marcus went very quiet and very alert at the same time, the way it used to go quiet, before a bar fight he could feel coming from 3 sentences off. "Sounds like you know him pretty well," Marcus said. "Grew up 2 houses down," the deputy said, already turning toward Callie, already reaching to take her arm, the way you'd take the arm of something you owned, and were simply retrieving. "Known him since Little League." Marcus didn't move his feet. He didn't raise his voice, but he set the water bottle down on the hood of his bike, slow, deliberate, the cap still loose, and the small sound of glass on metal seemed to land louder in that heat than it had any right to. The deputy's hand closed on empty air an inch from her elbow because she had stepped back, quick and small, the way a cat steps back from a closing door before the door has finished moving. Her shoulders hit the cinder block wall of the station. She did not look at the deputy. She looked at the water bottle sitting on the hood of the bike, cap loose, sweating in the heat, like it was the only steady thing in a landscape that had suddenly tilted. "Come on now," the deputy said, and his voice had gone into the register men use for children and spooked horses, gentle on the surface, iron underneath. "Let's get you home before dark." She said something. It did not carry far. It was pitched for one person only, and that person was not the deputy. "Don't tell my stepfather I'm here." Marcus heard it because he had spent 31 years learning to hear the things men said under the things they were supposed to say, in bars, in church basements at meetings he didn't want to be at, in phone calls with a daughter who eventually stopped calling. He heard it the way he'd once heard a man's breathing change right before a blade came out. He did not react with his face. He had trained his face a long time ago not to give anything away for free. The deputy either hadn't heard it or had decided not to. "She's a minor," the deputy said, mirrored sunglasses catching the white glare off the concrete, so that Marcus was looking at 2 small reflections of himself instead of a man's eyes. "I'm required to return her to a legal guardian." "She just told you she doesn't want to go," Marcus said. "She's 15. She doesn't get a vote." "She's got a mouth," Marcus said, "and she used it." The heat sat on all 3 of them like a hand pressing down. Somewhere behind the station, a grasshopper wound up and let go, that dry ratcheting sound that belongs to August afternoons, in places nothing grows anymore. Marcus did not step toward the deputy. He did not step away from Callie. He simply widened his stance an inch, the way he'd learned to widen it on a clubhouse floor when a conversation was about to become a decision, and he put his body at an angle that was not quite blocking anything, technically, legally, and was blocking everything. "You want to take a 15-year-old girl who just told you, out loud, she doesn't want to go home," Marcus said, slow, each word laid down like a plank across water. "You're going to want more than her stepdad's name and your say-so. That's not me telling you your job. That's me asking you to do it." The deputy's jaw worked once, a small muscle jumping above the sunburned line of his collar. "Step aside," he said. Marcus didn't. The deputy's hand drifted toward his belt, not to the weapon, just close enough to it that the gesture did its own talking. Mirrored sunglasses gave nothing back but sky and the flat gray shape of the pumps behind him. For 3 full seconds nobody moved, and the grasshoppers started up again somewhere in the weeds, indifferent to all of it. "You're interfering with a lawful welfare check," the deputy said. "I could call this in as obstruction right now, you understand that? I could have half your club's plates run before sundown." "Then call it in," Marcus said. The deputy didn't call it in. He looked past Marcus at the girl, who had gone very still again, that trained stillness, the kind that made her almost disappear standing in plain daylight, and something crossed his sunburned face that might have been calculation, or might have been the ordinary discomfort of a man who has just realized he is being watched by someone who will remember exactly what he did here. "This isn't your jurisdiction," the deputy said, though nobody had claimed it was. "This is a county matter, family matter. You people ride through. You don't live here. You don't know this family. You don't know anything," he said. "You people." The way some men said it, letting it carry more than the words alone would hold. "I know a girl said she doesn't want to go home," Marcus said. "That's all I know. That's enough." The deputy held there another moment, weighing something Marcus couldn't see the shape of, then turned and walked back to the cruiser without another word. Boots crunching gravel, movements a fraction too quick to be as unbothered as he wanted them to look. The door shut with more force than it needed, the engine caught, and the cruiser pulled out onto Route 9 in a wide, unhurried arc that was its own kind of statement, kicking up a long tan curtain of dust that hung in the windless air, and took its time settling, the sun pushing straight through it in dirty gold shafts. Marcus watched until the dust had mostly come back to earth, and the road was empty in both directions, heat shimmering off the blacktop in a way that made the horizon look liquid. He understood, standing there, that he had just done something he could not undo by riding away. He could not hand her back to a house with a locked door and a stepfather's name that made her flinch. He could not put her on the back of his bike and simply keep her, either. That was its own kind of taking, and he had spent 31 years learning the difference between protecting someone and deciding for them. He took the phone from his vest pocket, thumb hovering over the number for the clubhouse, and for a moment did nothing but breathe the burnt asphalt air and listen to the girl's careful, silent breathing beside him. Then he called it in. The call took 4 minutes and produced a plan smaller than he expected. Not the clubhouse, not yet, but the diner on the edge of town, the one with the cracked vinyl booths and the sign missing its third letter, so that from a distance it read, Din R, a place where a girl without shoes could sit in air conditioning, and no one would ask questions louder than the ones he was already carrying. He offered her the bike first, out of habit, and watched her look at it the way she'd looked at the cruiser. Not fear exactly, more calculation, weighing an unfamiliar risk against a familiar one, and so instead he walked her the quarter-mile to his truck, parked behind the station, held the door until she understood he meant for her to get in, and said nothing about the dust her bare feet left on the floor mat. Inside the diner, the waitress did not blink at bare feet or torn backpacks. Small towns absorb strangeness the way sand absorbed water, without visible reaction, until you dug down and found where it had all gone. She slid into the booth across from him with her spine straight, both hands flat on the table like she was bracing for it to move, and when the laminated menu came, she did not open it until he opened his first. She ordered eggs and toast, plain, and when they arrived, she did not eat the way a hungry person eats. She cut the toast into quarters, then eighths, and made each bite last, chewing slowly, eyes down, the way a person eats when they have learned that a meal might be the only one for a while, and must be stretched to feel like more than it is. He recognized it because he had seen it in men just back from places where food came on a schedule set by someone else's mercy, and it did something to his chest he did not examine too closely. "How old are you?" he asked, not unkindly, and she answered it, 15, before she seemed to decide whether she should have. He asked her name next, first and last, and she gave him only the first half of what he'd asked, said it like a small coin she was willing to spend, but not the whole purse, and did not offer the rest even when the silence afterwards stretched long enough that a lesser man would have pushed. He didn't push. He drank his coffee, black and too hot, and let the quiet sit between them, the way he'd learned to let quiet sit in a hospital corridor once, years back, waiting on news he hadn't wanted. Outside the window, the heat made the parking lot shimmer over asphalt, soft enough to hold a boot print, and somewhere behind her eyes, he understood, a decision was still being made about how much of the truth she could afford to hand a stranger, with gray in his beard and patches on his vest. The waitress brought pie he hadn't ordered, 2 forks, the way some women in some diners still knew to do without being asked, and set it between them like a peace treaty. The girl looked at it a long moment before she picked up a fork, and he understood that too, that food offered without warning could feel like a trap as easily as a kindness, that a person taught to expect nothing free learns to suspect the free thing hardest of all. She ate slow. He let her. "Locked out," she said eventually, not looking up, the words coming the way confessions come to men who've spent time in rooms with folding chairs and coffee urns. Sideways, low, aimed at the table rather than the listener. "If I'm loud, if I forget things." She said it like a rule of weather, something that simply happened, the way rain happened, sometimes all night. He kept his eyes on his coffee. He had learned, decades back, that a man's face could close a door faster than any word. "How many times?" he asked. "I don't know. A lot." A pause. "I started writing them down." He did not ask where. He filed it. "Your mother," he said, and watched something in her go still in a different way. A stiller stillness, the kind that isn't calm, but its opposite worn as a mask. "She doesn't. She says I make things up." The girl's fork stopped moving. "She says he's tired, that he works hard." She said this the way a person recites something memorized under duress, word perfect and hollowed out, and he recognized the cadence because he had heard something like it before, half a lifetime ago, from a woman standing in a doorway with a suitcase and a girl of 6 on her hip, telling him he was tired too, that the club was tired, that everyone had an excuse and hers had run out. He had not thought of that doorway in some time. It came to him now with the particular unkindness of a thing that arrives uninvited and sits down at the table like it owns a chair there. Dana had been 6. She used to hide under the porch when the shouting started, and for years afterward he had told himself she hid because she was playing, because children hide, because it meant nothing, a lie he'd kept warm and fed like a stray animal until it grew too large to keep in the house of what he let himself believe. He looked at the girl across from him, at the way she held her fork like a tool rather than a comfort, and did not say any of this. He asked instead, quiet, the question costing him more than she could know, "Does he hit you?" She didn't answer right away. Outside, a truck idled too long at the pump, its engine ticking in the heat, and somewhere past that the sky had gone the flat white of noon, the kind of light that erased shadows entirely, left nothing anywhere to hide in. "Not exactly," she said finally, and looked up at him for the first time since the pie arrived, and he understood the answer was worse than exactly, was a shape he'd have to coax out slower, one splinter at a time. She reached for the backpack then, the torn green canvas of it, and unzipped the pocket that had been sewn shut once and split open again, the thread hanging loose like something that had given up trying. Her hands moved, the way hands move when they have done a thing so many times in secret that the secrecy has become part of the motion itself. Quick, economical, no wasted gesture. A girl who had learned that anything done in the open could be taken from her. She drew out a spiral notebook swollen with old water damage, the cover curled back on itself, the wire binding rusted in 3 places, and she set it on the table between them, like she was setting down something that might still detonate. He didn't touch it right away. "You don't have to," he said, though he wanted her to, wanted it with a hunger that frightened him a little, the same hunger he remembered from years of not knowing what was happening on the other side of a door he wasn't allowed through. She opened it herself. The pages were warped, rippled from moisture and dried again. The ink in places bled to a pale ghost of itself, but the handwriting was careful, deliberate, a girl's neat cursive that had clearly practiced staying steady even when the hand beneath it wasn't. Dates ran down the margins like a ledger. March 14th, March 29th, April 6th. Beside each one, a few words only, locked out till 11. Bruise same arm. Said sorry after, gave me $20, told me not to tell Mom. 11 months of it, page after page, the entries growing sparser in June, and then dense again in July, as if something had escalated, and she'd needed to get it down faster than her hand could carry the words. He read 3 pages before he understood what he was looking at, and then he had to stop and put both palms flat on the table because something in his chest had come loose, and he needed a moment before it settled back into place. "You've been keeping this," he said, "not a question." "Since it started getting bad," she said. "I didn't know who I'd show it to. I just didn't want it to be like it never happened." Outside, the truck at the pump finally pulled away, and the diner went quiet enough that he could hear the ceiling fan ticking overhead, could hear his own pulse doing something unfamiliar in his ears. He thought of Dana under the porch, of years spent believing what was easiest to believe, and he understood, looking at this water-stained proof a 15-year-old had built for herself out of nothing but a pen and the discipline not to look away from her own life, that he had run out of room to look away from his. "I need to make a call," he said, and his voice did not sound like his own. The parking lot asphalt had gone soft in the heat, tacky under his boots like something half alive, and he stood beside his bike with the phone against his ear and the notebook still open in his mind even though it sat closed on the diner table behind him, her hand resting on top of it the way a person rests a hand on something they are afraid will be taken. The president answered on the 3rd ring. Gravel voice, unhurried, the sound of a man who had learned long ago that nothing on the phone was ever as urgent as it felt. "You're supposed to be riding lead tomorrow," the president said. "There's a girl," he said, 15, barefoot. "Stepfather's been on her for the better part of a year, and she's got it written down. Dates, what happened, all of it." Silence on the line, the kind that had weight. "You know the rule," the president said. "I know it. 22 years, and we're still paying for what happened last time we didn't." He remembered it the way everyone in the chapter remembered it, second-hand and worn smooth with retelling. A custody fight the club had waded into with good intentions and no plan. A judge who used it against them for a decade after. A family torn apart worse than before they'd touched it. The rule existed because men who meant well had once made things worse, and the club had decided, in the quiet, brutal way clubs decide things, that some doors were not theirs to open. "This isn't a custody fight," he said. "This is a kid with bruises and a notebook nobody's looked at except me. She's got no shoes. She's been sleeping behind a gas station. And a deputy already came sniffing around, you said. Wanted to walk her home like nothing happened." Another silence, longer. He could hear, faintly, the sound of the clubhouse behind the president's voice. A radio, someone's laugh, the ordinary noise of men who did not yet know their afternoon was about to change. "You bring this to the table," the president said finally, "not to me alone. Everybody hears it, everybody votes. That's the only way I put this in front of the rule. That's fair. And Marcus," the name landed like a hand on the shoulder, "you understand what you're asking. Once we're in, we're in. There's no riding this one halfway." He looked back through the diner window at the top of her head bent over the table, small and still, the fan turning slow shadows across her shoulders. "I understand," he said. "Then get her somewhere safe tonight, and bring this to roll call. I'll make the calls." The line went dead. He stood a moment longer in the heat, phone warm against his palm, the number 22 turning over in him like a stone he could not quite let go, and then he went back inside, to where she was still sitting, notebook closed, waiting to find out if anyone besides her had believed it was real. The bell over the diner door rang twice more before 3 o'clock, and each time he turned toward it out of habit, though it was never her people, never anyone she needed to fear. It was only the town noticing. A woman in a waitress apron who'd worked there 11 years watched him settle the girl into a booth with a second glass of water and did not ask questions, only refilled the water without being told to. By 4, the first bike came off the highway and into the gravel lot behind the clubhouse, engine dying into that particular silence that follows a long ride, ticking metal, boots on gravel, no words yet. By 5 there were 9, a man with a silver beard and a service dog that never left his knee. A woman with cropped gray hair and a jacket so old the patches had gone the color of dust. They did not ask why they'd been called. They only came, the way men come to a funeral before they know whose name is on the stone, trusting the summons enough to skip the reasons. He stayed at the diner until the fan overhead had turned 1,000 slow circles and the light outside had shifted from white to gold, and only then did he drive her the 4 miles to the clubhouse himself, her knees drawn up in the truck seat, the green backpack held against her chest like something that might be taken from her again if she loosened her grip. Inside, the noise had changed, not louder, quieter, in the way that always meant something mattered. Men who normally shouted across the lot now spoke close to each other's ears. Someone had moved the folding tables into rows without being asked. Someone else was writing names on a legal pad by the door, tallying instead of guessing, because guessing was how people got the count wrong when it mattered. By 7, the number stood at 31. By 9, headlights kept turning into the drive, one pair, then two together, then a cluster of 5 who'd ridden in formation from 2 counties over, and each time the tally at the door climbed by 1, then 3, then 1 again, a man in a canvas vest reading the number out loud, like a countdown nobody had asked for but everybody needed. He did roll call himself at 11 o'clock, standing on an overturned crate so his voice would carry over the low murmur that had settled into the room, and when the last name was called and the last hand raised, the number that came back to him was 44. He looked at the number the way he had looked at the number 22 on the phone that afternoon, turning it over, comparing its weight. 44, for a 15-year-old girl, who had walked 5 miles barefoot behind a gas station most of them had never noticed, was still standing. He did not say anything more. He only nodded once, stepped down off the crate, and went to find her, because roll call was over, and now came the harder part, telling a room full of hardened men what she had written in a water-stained notebook, and asking them to believe it the way he already had. The lawyer arrived a little after 9, driving a gray sedan with a cracked windshield that looked out of place among the trucks and bikes crowding the lot. She was in her 60s, small, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a leather satchel that had seen more courtrooms than most of the men in that room had seen highway. She did not shake anyone's hand. She asked for a table, a chair, and good light, and someone brought her all 3 without being told twice. She read the notebook the way a person reads something they already suspect will change the shape of their evening, slowly, twice through certain pages. Once she stopped and pressed 2 fingers against her mouth, and the room, without discussing it, went quieter than it had been all night. When she finally looked up, she took off her glasses and set them on the table beside the water-swollen pages. "This is good," she said. "This is very good, and I want to be clear about what that means before anybody in here starts feeling relieved." Nobody moved. "Fear isn't evidence," she said. "A scared kid saying she's scared. A judge hears that every week, and half the time he's right to be careful, because half the time somebody's coaching her. But dates?" She tapped the notebook once, gently, the way a person touches something fragile. Dates. And what happened on them, written down as they happened, over 11 months, in her own hand, before anyone came looking for her. That's not fear. That's testimony. The road captain, who had done roll call, stood near the door with his arms crossed, listening the way he listened to weather reports before a long ride. "So it's enough," he said. "It's not enough by itself." The lawyer folded her hands. "It's enough to get someone to listen. That's different. I need a caseworker who will read this and put her name on a recommendation, not just nod and go home. I need someone from the state, not the county, someone who doesn't drink coffee with the deputy on Sunday mornings." A few men shifted at that, and she did not apologize for saying it. "You know somebody," the president said. It wasn't a question. "I know somebody," she agreed. "I'll call her tonight, and she'll want to see the girl herself. Hear it from her, not from a room full of you." She looked around at the vests, the patches, the gray beards, without judgment and without warmth either. That part you can't do for her. That part she has to do alone. She closed the notebook, careful of the water-warped spine, and slid it back across the table, like something she was returning, rather than something she had merely read. But if she can say it twice, she said, the way she wrote it down once, I think we have something. The room the club kept for guests had not been used in longer than anyone could say with certainty. Someone thought it had held a stranded prospect through an ice storm 2 winters back, but nobody was sure. It smelled of cedar and old paint. A window unit rattled in the frame, losing the fight against the heat that still pressed against the glass at 9 at night. The air outside thick as bathwater even now, the heat index refusing to loosen its grip on the day. Someone had gone in ahead of her. The lamp on the nightstand was on, its shade the color of weak tea, throwing a low gold light instead of the room's harsh overhead bulb. Across the back of the single chair, a flannel jacket had been draped. Men's, oversized, the plaid faded from 100 washes, the elbows soft with wear. Nobody said who had put it there. Nobody asked. She stood in the doorway a long moment before she went in, the way a person checks the depth of water before stepping off a dock. Then she crossed to the bed, sat on the edge of it, and touched the flannel with 2 fingers, as if testing whether it was real. You don't have to wear it, he said from the hall. It's just there if you're cold. It's not cold, she said, which was true, but she pulled it into her lap anyway and held it there, the way a smaller child holds a toy it has outgrown but is not ready to give up. He did not go home. He told himself he would, once the light went off, once he heard her breathing even out. He sat on the floor of the hallway with his back against the wall opposite her door, boots off, vest still on, because taking it off felt like leaving, and leaving felt like a door he wasn't ready to walk through. The clubhouse settled around him in its old building way, pipes ticking, someone's television murmuring 2 rooms over, then going quiet. Twice he heard her shift on the mattress. Once he heard nothing at all. For so long he leaned toward the door before he heard her breathe again, and made himself sit back. The lamp stayed on. He did not go in and turn it off. He understood, without being told, that the light was doing something a locked door and a closed mouth could not. It was saying someone is awake near you, and you are allowed to also be awake. There is no cost to it tonight. Somewhere past midnight he thought of another hallway, another door, a smaller version of himself standing outside it, 19 years gone, and how he had not sat down that time, had not stayed, had let the leaving win. He did not examine the thought long. He only noted it, the way he noted weather, and let it pass through him without asking anything of him yet. By 2 in the morning his eyes had adjusted fully to the dark, and when he looked at the strip of gold light beneath her door, it seemed to him the steadiest thing in the building. The caseworker arrived a little after 9, when the heat had already climbed past 90, and the parking lot outside the clubhouse shimmered like something underwater. She was smaller than he'd expected, dressed plainly, carrying a canvas satchel instead of a briefcase, and she did not flinch at the row of motorcycles or the men leaning against the fence with their arms folded, watching her the way they watched weather that might turn. She asked for a quiet room and got one. She asked to speak with the girl alone first, and the lawyer nodded, and Marcus stood in the hallway outside, a different door now, a different morning, and made himself stay still. The interview took 2 hours. He knew because he watched the clock on the kitchen wall the whole time. The way a man watches a gauge he cannot read but trusts is telling him something important. When she came out, the caseworker did not smile. She sat across from the lawyer at the long table with the notebook open between them, its water-stained pages fanned out like something that had survived a flood, and she matched dates against a manila folder she'd brought, school attendance records, a clinic visit from March, a missed dentist appointment in June that lined up, almost to the day, with an entry describing a night Callie had slept in the tool shed. "It's consistent," she said. Her voice was flat in the particular way of someone who had trained herself not to let a voice carry more than the facts could bear. Too consistent to be coached, too specific to be invented. The lawyer asked what that meant, practically, and the caseworker said the word severe, and then said it again, softer, as if the room needed a moment to absorb it a second time before moving forward. Marcus stood by the window with his arms crossed, watching heat rise off the gravel in visible sheets, and did not say anything for a long while. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now I file," the caseworker said. "Today, and I start making calls to Larkspur." She looked at him then, the first time she'd looked directly at him since arriving, and something in her face, not warmth exactly, but recognition, passed between them. "She trusts you," she said. "That matters more than you probably think it does." He didn't answer that. Outside, a pair of riders were checking oil levels on bikes that didn't need checking, giving their hands something to do. Somewhere down the hall, faint and unhurried, he could hear Callie's voice, and then the lawyer's, low and even, and he found himself listening for the shape of it, rather than the words. Proof only that the conversation was still going, still moving forward, still alive. The deputy's cruiser came up the gravel road a little after 4, throwing a thin curtain of dust that hung in the heat and did not settle. He parked crooked at the gate, the way men do when they want the vehicle itself to look impatient, and he got out with his sunglasses on and his thumbs in his belt, and he did not walk so much as advance. 44 riders were already outside. Nobody had called them. Word simply moved through the chapter the way it always did, bike to bike, porch to porch, until the yard in front of the clubhouse was full of men and women standing in loose, unhurried rows, not blocking the gate exactly, just present, the way a tree line is present. "I'm here for the Reyes girl," the deputy said, though nobody had told him her last name, and the saying of it sat wrong in the air, like he'd reached for something that wasn't his to hold. Marcus stepped forward, slow, unbothered, a man walking to check his mail. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said. "That's not your call to make." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's the caseworkers, and the judges. You're welcome to wait for either one." The deputy's jaw worked under the sunburn. He looked past Marcus at the rows of riders, at the vests, at the arms crossed over chests, and something in his shoulders recalculated. The arithmetic of a man used to being the loudest thing in any room discovering the room had gone quiet on purpose. "You people don't get to decide what happens in this county." Nobody answered that. That was the part that undid him. The silence. 44 bodies standing still in the shimmering heat. Not one hand near a weapon. Not one voice raised. Just weight. Just number. Just the plain fact of them not moving. A man can push against anger. He has no leverage against stillness. He stood a moment longer, sunglasses reflecting a yard full of people who would not look away from him and would not step toward him either, and then he said something about filing a report, about this not being over, and got back into the cruiser too fast, so that gravel spit from under the tires when he reversed. Nobody cheered. Nobody laughed. A few riders exchanged glances, brief and grim, and then went back to what they'd been doing before he arrived, wiping down chrome, checking a chain, standing watch over nothing in particular except the low white house where a girl sat with a lawyer, going over dates in a water-stained notebook, one page at a time, like a woman diffusing something with her bare hands. Marcus stayed at the gate until the dust settled completely, until the road was just road again, and only then did he go back inside. 6 weeks had passed by then, and the county courtroom smelled of old paper and window caulk, a room built for water disputes and unpaid taxes, not for this. A ceiling fan turned overhead in slow, uneven rotations, clicking once on every third pass, a sound he would remember longer than most of what was said. The judge was an older woman, with reading glasses pushed low on her nose, and she held the notebook the way people hold things they already suspect will matter more than they want it to, carefully, at the edges, as if the water damage might still be spreading. The lawyer entered it into evidence with a case number and a date, and just like that, 11 months of a girl's private arithmetic became Exhibit C. He sat in the gallery in a chair too small for him, hands on his knees, and made himself keep them there. He had learned, over 3 decades of engine noise and open road, how to sit still through things he could not fix with his hands, but this was a different stillness, tighter, and he gripped his own knee hard enough to whiten the knuckle. She was called to the stand in a blue dress the caseworker had bought her the week before, and she climbed into the chair the way a much younger child might, feet not quite touching the floor, and when she spoke her voice did not shake the way he had braced for. It was small, it was steady. She gave dates, she gave the yellow-green bruise a date and a room, and a reason invented on the spot by an adult who was not in the courtroom to defend it. She said the word. Locked. Twice, plainly, without flourish, the way she might have read a grocery list, and the fan clicked, and the judge's pen moved across a legal pad in short, even strokes that seemed, to him, obscenely calm against what was being said. The caseworker testified next, then the lawyer summarized, and somewhere in the back rows he heard a chair creak as one of the riders, Sunday maybe, or preacher, shifted his weight and went still again. Nobody outside the family had ever been in a room to hear any of it before. He understood, watching the judge set the notebook down at last and remove her glasses, that this was the whole of it, not the roll call, not the gate, not the 44 bikes lined up in the heat, but this, a girl's own words, finally believed, in a room with a fan that clicked on every third turn, moving toward a decision he could not yet see the shape of. The judge did not raise her voice. She had the kind of voice that had said hard things for 30 years and had learned there was no need to dress them up. She stated the date. She stated the finding, a pattern, she called it, documented and corroborated, sufficient for emergency action, and she said the word. Transfer. The way a person sets down something heavy they have been carrying too long. Custody, effective immediately, to the maternal grandmother, a town 2 counties east, a name he had heard only once before, in a kitchen, over a bottle of water gone warm, Larkspur. He watched the girl's shoulders, not her face. Her face he could not read yet, had never fully learned to read, but her shoulders came down half an inch, and that half inch told him more than any ruling could. The judge was not finished. She turned a page, and her tone changed, just slightly, the way a mechanic's tone changes when he finds the second problem after fixing the first. She noted, for the record, that the deputy's relationship to the accused had been confirmed independently by the caseworker. Phone records, a childhood address, a yearbook photograph the caseworker had thought to pull. Personal ties, undisclosed, a pattern of delay in a case involving a minor. She was referring the matter, she said, to the appropriate office. She did not look toward the back row where he was not sitting. She did not need to. Outside, later, standing in the parking lot with the heat still pressing down at 101, though it was nearly 5, the caseworker told him the report had already gone in that morning, before the hearing even started, time-stamped and separate from anything the girl had said in the room. Clean, deliberate, not vengeance. Just the shape a system takes when it finally works the way it was supposed to. He thought of the deputy's mirrored sunglasses, the calm voice at the gas station telling him this wasn't his business. He felt no triumph in it, only the flat, tired satisfaction of a debt being paid on schedule. The girl came out of the courthouse with the lawyer's hand briefly on her shoulder, and she did not run to him, did not smile, only walked in his direction the way she walked toward everything now, deliberately, watching where her feet went. She had shoes today, new ones, plain white, still creased at the toe. Larkspur, she said, testing the word. 2 counties, he said. I'll ride you there myself, if the club's still standing when it's time. She nodded once, and looked past him at the line of bikes along the curb, chrome throwing back the white afternoon light, and did not ask how many. She already knew. The last night in Iron Ridge, she slept in the clubhouse guest room, with the door open and the lamp on, the way she had asked for it, without quite asking, just glancing at the switch, and then at him, until he understood. He sat in the hallway on a folding chair someone had carried up from the kitchen, his back against the wall, his boots crossed at the ankle. The house settled the way old houses do after midnight, ticking as the wood gave back the day's heat. Down the hall a window unit rattled, and caught, and rattled again. He did not read. He did not check his phone. He watched the rectangle of yellow light lying across the hallway floor and the small disturbance in it when she turned over. She did not thrash. That was the thing he noticed, the thing he would remember longer than the courthouse, longer than the sunglasses and the mirrored calm of the deputy's voice. She did not startle at the settling house, did not sit up at the window unit's cough. Somewhere after 2 she made a sound that was not quite a word, and he leaned forward, and it did not come again, and her breathing lengthened instead of catching, in and out, slow as a tide going the right direction for once. He thought about the notebook, water-stained, sitting now in a manila folder in the lawyer's office, its pages photographed and paginated and made into something the law could hold. He thought about how a person could spend 11 months writing down her own life in secret so that one day someone might believe her, and how she had done that without anyone teaching her to, the way some children learn to be quiet before they learn to read. Near 4, the light in the room did not change, only steadied, the way a held breath steadies before it is finally let out. He got up once, checked that the door was still open the width she wanted, no more, no less, and sat back down. He thought of another hallway, another lamp, 19 years gone, a door he had not been allowed to leave open because he had not been the one who got to decide. At 5, the sky outside the far window went from black to the gray-blue that comes before color, and somewhere a rooster 2 properties over started up out of habit rather than necessity. She slept through it. She slept through the first slant of true light finding the floorboards. He sat and watched a 15-year-old girl get an entire night, uninterrupted, unbroken, unclaimed by anyone, and understood that this, not the hearing, not the roll call, not the 44 bikes on the curb, was the thing the whole summer had been for. By early October, the guest room lamp had been switched off for good, packed with the rest of her things into a borrowed truck bed, the green canvas backpack, mended now, the tear stitched shut by someone's wife who did leather work on the side, riding on the seat beside her like it had earned the right. The drive to Larkspur took 2 hours. He rode behind the truck the whole way, not because anyone asked him to, and at the county line he did not cross. He raised 2 fingers off the handlebar, and in the side mirror he watched her raise hers back, and that was the whole ceremony of it. The photograph came in December, a plain envelope with no return address needed, because everyone in the clubhouse knew the handwriting by then. It showed a girl standing in front of a brick building holding a folder of papers, squinting into cold sunlight, wearing shoes. Someone pinned it to the corkboard beside the roll call sheet from August, the one with 44 names on it, and it stayed there through the winter and into the next year, and no one ever took it down, and no one ever mentioned that they checked it the way other men checked scripture. Seasons went by the way they do when a person is not standing still to watch them, a fast, embarrassed shuffling of years, the kind that only announces itself in the mirror and in the ache of old joints on cold mornings. Chapters changed presidents. 2 members died, one of a heart that had been failing since before the girl was ever found, one of the road itself, a curve outside Bakersfield that had claimed better riders. New patches came in, young and loud, not yet worn down into the kind of quiet the older men had learned the hard way. Through all of it, the photograph stayed on the board, and every August the club rode the same charity run they always had, and every August a version of the same heat settled over Iron Ridge, like something that intended to stay. 3 years brought her back on the pillion seat of his bike, not the truck this time, not a stranger's kindness, his machine, her arms locked around a waist that had gotten no less thick with age, her hair loose under a borrowed helmet, boots on her feet that had clearly walked a lot of miles since the last pair, 18 now. Not hiding from anything, she swung her leg off the bike at the clubhouse gate the way someone does who has ridden pillion before, who has stopped being surprised by her own balance, and stood in the gravel lot looking at 40-some bikes gleaming under a sun that still, every year, without fail, tried to break 100 degrees by noon. She laughed at something. One of the younger patches said, head tipped back, and the sound carried across the lot the way certain sounds do in dry heat, clean and unbroken, nothing held back in it. He stood by the fence and watched her, the way a man watches weather he no longer needs to worry about, not tracking the danger in it anymore, just grateful to be standing under it. He went inside before she saw him watching. The guest room was empty now, had been empty for 3 years, the lamp still there on the nightstand, though nobody plugged it in most nights. He sat on the edge of the bed that had held her sleep that first long night, and he took out a pad of paper he'd bought 2 days earlier at the drugstore in town and hadn't touched, and a pen that skipped twice before it caught. He wrote the date first, because that was habit. 31 years of logbooks and roll calls had taught him that much. Put the date down. The date is the truth of a thing. Then he wrote her name. He did not write about the years he'd been sober, or the years before that when he hadn't been. He did not explain the club, or the road, or the version of himself that had signed papers in a courthouse without looking up. He wrote about a girl he'd found barefoot behind a gas station, and what it had cost him to sit outside a door all night listening for breathing, and how he'd understood, sometime around the second week of that August, that he was paying a debt to a stranger's daughter because he had never found a way to pay it to his own. He wrote that he was not asking for anything. He wrote that he understood if there was nothing left to ask for. He wrote, at the end, in handwriting that had gotten worse with age and a busted knuckle that never set right, that he hoped she'd had someone, somewhere along the way, who noticed when she went quiet. He folded it once, put it in an envelope he'd already addressed weeks ago, and then left sitting in a drawer, and set it by the door so he wouldn't lose his nerve overnight. Outside, the engines were starting up for the run, 40-some of them turning the heat into sound, and somewhere in the middle of that noise was a young woman who had once refused to give her last name to anyone, now laughing with her arms crossed against the glare, waiting on nobody, hiding from nothing. Some debts get paid to the wrong child first. A man learns that late, if he learns it at all, and the learning is not the end of the guilt, only the beginning of the letter he finally sends.